Have you ever looked at the person you love, right inside your own home, yet felt like the two of you were living in completely different worlds? In just 3 weeks here in the United States, I reached a point where one wrong sentence, one heavy sigh, one door closing too hard, could have shattered our marriage. And I had to relearn how to speak, how to listen, and how to love slowly, painfully, but in a way that saved us when nothing else could. 3 weeks of chaos. You know those moments when life feels like a movie you didn't audition for? That was me during the last 3 weeks in the United States. Caught somewhere between love, exhaustion, and the terrifying possibility that the person sleeping next to me was slowly becoming a stranger. It's funny because people think marriages break from big disasters. But sometimes it's the quiet things, the missed looks, the rushed mornings, the unanswered "Are you okay?" that tear you apart more than any loud argument ever could. Picture this: a kitchen full of half-finished conversations, 2 cups of coffee going cold, and both of us pretending we weren't hurt. If silence had a temperature, ours could freeze the walls. And the strangest part? We were still doing all the normal couple things. Shopping for groceries, folding laundry, paying bills, but everything felt off. Like love was still there, but hiding behind a door neither of us knew how to open. And here's the twist. Even though English isn't my first language, it wasn't the vocabulary that failed me. It was the courage to say what actually mattered. Because sometimes the hardest sentence you'll ever speak isn't a complicated one. It's something painfully simple like, "I feel alone next to you." But try saying that out loud. Try saying it when your voice shakes, when your heart feels like it's standing on thin ice. Your tongue suddenly weighs 1,000 pounds. Brains are weird like that. They're built to protect us from danger, but they also mistake vulnerability for danger. So instead of opening up, you shut down. Instead of speaking slowly and honestly, you rush through words or avoid them entirely. And your partner, confused, tired, and whispering their own silent fears, starts doing the same. Before you realize it, you're no longer fighting with each other, you're fighting next to each other, both losing something you're too scared to name. I remember one morning when everything felt especially heavy. The sunlight was coming through the living room window, but it didn't warm anything. She asked, "Did you sleep okay?" A simple, harmless question. But I heard my own voice answering too quickly, too flat. "Yeah, fine." It was a lie, of course. I hadn't slept at all. My head was loud with questions that had no answers. Are we okay? When did this distance start? How do we fix something we can't even describe? But here's the part no one tells you. Relationships don't collapse overnight. They fade in tiny, unnoticed pieces. And they're rebuilt the same way. One honest word at a time, spoken slowly enough for both hearts to catch up. That morning, as I watched her stirring her coffee, I realized something painfully simple. If we didn't change the way we communicated, we wouldn't survive this season. Not as lovers. Not as partners. Not as anything. And that realization was the beginning of everything that came next. Love lost in translation. Imagine sitting across from someone you love and realizing that every word you speak lands just a little bit wrong. Like a radio station that's almost clear but still buzzing with static. That was us. Not because of English, not really, but because emotions don't follow grammar rules. They spill, they twist, they hide behind pauses and sighs. And when you're already fragile, even the softest sentence can feel like a blade. There was a moment early in the second week when she said, "I just want you to talk to me." Simple, right? 6 little words. But my brain heard something completely different. It sounded like judgment, like disappointment, like you're failing again. It's wild how the mind can twist gentle intentions when your heart is tired. And I responded with the worst combination ever invented. Silence plus forced smile. If miscommunication were a sport, we would have won gold. And here's the strange, stubborn truth. When you live in a country that isn't your own, like I do now in the United States, your emotions sometimes feel like they're running through a second translation system. You don't just think about what you want to say. You think about how it might sound, how it might be misunderstood, how it might make you appear too emotional, too weak, too foreign. That mental filter is exhausting. And exhaustion is the birthplace of distance. One night, she asked, "Why don't you ever tell me what you feel?" She said it gently, but my heartbeat reacted like a fire alarm. Because what I wanted to say was messy, uncomfortable, and terrifyingly honest. "I'm scared that if I tell you everything, you'll see the parts of me I can't translate and you'll walk away." But instead of saying that, I gave her a half answer. Something vague about being tired, something safe and soft that didn't match the storm inside me. That's the tragedy of communication in relationships. The more afraid you are of losing someone, the more you hide the things that could save you both. Psychologists say that when couples feel disconnected, their brains become hypersensitive to threat. A raised eyebrow can feel like an accusation. A neutral tone can sound like anger. A normal pause becomes a sign of rejection. Your nervous system starts playing detective, looking for danger even when none exists. And trust me, once your brain enters that mode, even the English language itself feels like a puzzle full of traps. I began noticing tiny things. How she hesitated before speaking. How her eyes looked tired even when she smiled. How her voice softened, like someone trying not to break anything fragile. And somehow painfully, I realized that she wasn't pulling away from me. She was reaching out. And I wasn't reaching back. Love doesn't disappear when people stop understanding each other. It simply gets buried under everything left unsaid. And in those quiet American nights, with the heater humming and my thoughts louder than any argument, I started to wonder, what if the real problem wasn't the words we used, but the truths we were both too scared to speak? That question was the crack that opened the door to everything that followed. The night we almost broke. There's a moment in every relationship when the air becomes so heavy that even breathing feels like a negotiation. For us, that moment arrived on a Thursday night. A night that looked ordinary from the outside but felt like the edge of a cliff from the inside. It started with something small, almost laughably small. A question about dinner plans. Sigh. A delayed answer. That's all it took for two tired hearts to slip into a place neither of us wanted to return to. I remember standing in the hallway, hearing her voice tremble just a little when she said, "I don't know how to talk to you anymore." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was something worse, quiet disappointment. The kind that echoes. The kind that shakes the floor more than shouting ever could. And my brain, oh brilliant overreacting brain, went into survival mode instantly. Fight, freeze, or flee. I chose the worst possible one, freeze. Imagine being a statue in your own relationship. Wanting to reach for her but staying still. Wanting to explain but saying nothing. Wanting to admit you're scared but burying it under a cold, flat, "I'm fine." If love were a language, mine suddenly lost all vocabulary. And here's where things get painfully human. When someone you love is hurting, your body knows it before your mind does. My chest tightened, my hands got cold, my heartbeat started tripping over itself. Neuroscience says that when emotional threat rises, the brain shuts down its language centers. That's why people go blank during fights. Basically, your nervous system throws your communication skills into the trash and says, "Good luck." And that's exactly what happened to me. She looked at me with eyes that were equal parts frustrated and tired, and she whispered, "Do you even want this anymore?" If you've ever had someone ask you that, you know the feeling. It's like gravity doubles and pulls everything in you downward. The truth was screaming inside me, yes. Yes, more than anything. But I couldn't get the words out in time. They got tangled somewhere between fear and pride, and what came out instead was a weak, pathetic, "I don't know." That sentence was a blade. I saw her face crumble, not dramatically, just a tiny shift, the kind that breaks you because it means the pain is real. For a second I thought that was it. The moment everything ended. The night our marriage quietly collapsed under the weight of things we didn't know how to say. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside to breathe. And I stayed frozen in the hallway, realizing something brutal. We weren't losing each other because we didn't care. We were losing each other because we didn't know how to speak when it mattered most. But here's the part no one expects. Sometimes, hitting the emotional bottom is the only way to create a place to rebuild from. And that night, dark, messy, terrifying, was the turning point we didn't know we needed. Why our brains fight first. Strange how the brain can betray the very heart it's supposed to protect. After that night, after the coat, the door, the cold air swallowing her footsteps, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt my entire body buzzing with a kind of electricity that wasn't anger, wasn't sadness, just fear. Pure animal fear. And fear does something ridiculous to communication. It makes your mouth useless and your imagination dangerous. See, the human brain has this ancient alarm system buried under all the modern thinking. It's fast, emotional, and terrible at relationships. Neuroscientists call it the amygdala. But in real life, it behaves like a toddler with a megaphone. Dramatic, impulsive, and convinced the world is ending every time someone raises an eyebrow. When your partner looks disappointed, toddler amygdala screams, "Run!" When they ask a hard question, hide. When they say, "We need to talk," that's it, the toddler flips the table. That cold Thursday night, mine went wild. That's why my chest tightened. That's why words felt heavy. That's why everything she asked sounded like an attack, even when it wasn't. It wasn't her tone. It wasn't her intention. It was my brain trying to protect me from something that wasn't a threat, but felt like one. And here's the crazy part. When the amygdala gets loud, the part of your brain that handles language, the prefrontal cortex, goes quiet. Literally. It shuts down to save energy, meaning the more emotional the moment, the fewer words you have. Which explains every "I don't know," "I'm fine," "forget it," and "nothing." Not because there was nothing to say, because the brain refused to say it. Imagine trying to have a meaningful conversation with someone you love while your nervous system is basically throwing a tantrum. That's what most couples fight through without even realizing it. When she came back inside that night, cheeks cold from the wind, eyes red but steady, something shifted. Not between us, but inside me. It hit me that if I kept letting fear talk for me, we wouldn't make it. Love doesn't need perfect language, but it does need honest language. Soft language. Slow language. The kind that whispers instead of defends. The kind that says, "I'm scared," before the fear turns into something sharper. So I did something small, ridiculously small, but scientifically powerful. I slowed my breathing. One of those tiny life hacks no one thinks matters. But it works because it sends a message to the brain we're safe. And when the brain believes that, the language centers open again. I didn't fix everything that night. We didn't hug and magically erase 3 weeks of distance. But I said a sentence that didn't feel like a weapon. I said, "I don't want us to be afraid of each other." My voice cracked, sure, but it came from the part of me that still believed in us. And for the first time in weeks, she sat beside me instead of across from me. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with a nervous system that finally stops panicking long enough for two people to hear each other again. Love in daily actions. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely happens in grand gestures. It happens in the tiny, almost forgettable moments. The ones that look insignificant to the world but feel life-saving to the two people living inside them. The week after that heavy night, our home became a quiet laboratory for small efforts. No dramatic speeches, no sweeping declarations. Just two people trying, awkwardly, imperfectly, to meet each other again. The first shift came the next morning. She placed my coffee on the table the way she used to, not sliding it toward me like a task to complete, but setting it gently, almost thoughtfully. It wasn't the coffee that mattered. It was the softness. Softness is the language love uses when words are still fragile. My brain felt it before I even tasted anything. Something inside loosened. Later that day. I did something equally simple. When she spoke, I put my phone down. Not halfway. Not screen-facing the table pretending I wasn't looking. Completely. Full attention. You would think it's basic, but trust me, when a relationship is cracked, even eye contact feels like a courageous act. And she noticed. Her voice steadied just a little. The air between us warmed just a little. These tiny repairs continued. She started asking me how my day was in a tone that didn't sound like a routine check-in, but like someone genuinely waiting for the answer. I started answering honestly, not with monologues but with truth. I felt anxious today. I missed you this morning. I'm trying my best. Simple sentences. Slow sentences. The kind you teach a beginner in an English class, but sometimes it's the beginner-level truths that rebuild the advanced parts of love. Funny thing is, these small acts align perfectly with relationship psychology. Researchers at the Gottman Institute say the health of a relationship is determined not by how couples handle big fights, but by how they respond to bids for connection. Those tiny moments when one person reaches out emotionally and the other person either turns toward or turns away. For 3 painful weeks, we had been turning away without realizing it. Now we were slowly turning toward point one evening. She cooked dinner and left a sticky note on my plate. "Thank you for trying with me." 8 words. But it hit me harder than any dramatic apology ever could. Because daily love isn't loud. It's consistent. It's choosing each other in the quiet hours, in the tired evenings, in the moments when giving up seems easier. Step by step, coffee cups, gentle tone, patient listening, we were weaving our connection back together. Not perfectly, not instantly, but with intention. And somewhere inside that week of tiny gestures I felt something return. Not passion, not bliss, those come later. What returned was hope. And hope, when shared between two people, is what allows love to breathe again. Rebuilding through simple words. There's a strange kind of magic in speaking slowly. Like giving your heart a moment to think before your fear interrupts. During the 3rd week, our evenings in the United States turned into gentle language lessons. Not the formal kind with textbooks and grammar drills, but the kind where two people learn to speak to each other again. Not perfectly, not fluently, just honestly. It started unintentionally. One night, while we were both sitting on the couch, she scrolling absent-mindedly, me pretending to watch TV. I said something I normally would have rushed through. "Can we talk a little?" Not dramatic, not poetic, just slow enough that she could hear the vulnerability in it. She looked up surprised, not because of the words but because of the softness. The slowness. It made room for her to breathe. And so, for the first time in weeks, we talked. Not about big problems, those were too heavy still, but about small, harmless things. What she cooked growing up, why autumn in the US feels different from anywhere else, the strange little habits we noticed about each other. It felt like reconnecting with a friend you never stopped loving but somehow forgot how to approach. The best part? Those conversations were in English. And because I spoke slowly, intentionally, gently, I didn't trip over the words the way I usually do when my emotions are messy. The funny twist is that speaking slowly isn't just good for language learning. It's good for relationships. Neurologists say slow speech signals safety. It calms the listener's nervous system, lowers defensiveness, and invites honesty. In other words, speaking slowly isn't a language skill. It's a love skill. We began doing this every night. 10 minutes. Sometimes 15. No phones. No distractions. Just us choosing simple sentences like stepping stones across a river we thought was too wide to cross. I felt hurt. I want to understand you. Today was hard. I missed you. Nothing poetic. Nothing Instagram worthy. Just truth spoken gently enough that neither of us needed armor. Something shifted. Her shoulders softened when she talked. My voice stopped trembling. We laughed, quiet laughs at first, like the early sparks of a fire trying to survive the wind. Then louder laughs. Real ones. The kind that stitch a heart back together without asking permission. One night, she reached for my hand mid-sentence. Not dramatically. Not as a grand gesture. Just this natural, instinctive movement, the kind people do when they feel safe. And that simple touch said what no long speech could. We're not done. We're not broken. We're still here. Day by day, word by word, we rebuilt something that had almost slipped away. Not through big changes but through simple sentences spoken with new intention. Love didn't come back all at once, but it came back quietly, like a language finally making sense after weeks of confusion. The moment the bond returned, there's a moment in every healing story when something tiny, almost invisible, tells you that love has quietly come back home. For us, it happened on a Sunday morning, wrapped inside a moment so ordinary it could have been missed entirely. No dramatic music, no grand confession, just sunlight, a kitchen, and two people who had finally stopped running from each other. I was standing by the counter making breakfast, well, attempting to. Pancakes that were uneven, a little burnt, a little embarrassing. She walked in, hair a mess, eyes still soft with sleep. And instead of the cautious silence we'd been living in for weeks, she did something simple, painfully simple. She laughed. Not a sharp laugh. Not a tired laugh. A warm one, like the kind she used to make when we were still learning each other's rhythms. And that laugh, it cracked something open in me. Like the sound itself reached into the quietest corner of the house and whispered, "We're okay." Not perfect, but okay. It's wild how the heart knows before the mind does. My body responded first. My shoulders dropped. The tension in my chest loosened. Even the air seemed softer, like the whole room exhaled for the first time in weeks. Then came the moment. The one I didn't see coming. She stepped behind me, rested her cheek lightly on my back, and wrapped her arms around my waist. No words. No explanation. Just presence. Just closeness. The kind of closeness you can't fake, can't force, can't perform for show. The kind that only exists when the bond has begun to heal long before either of you dares to admit it. I froze. Not from fear this time, but because I realized something quietly devastating. This was the same woman I thought I was losing just days earlier. And here she was, choosing me without needing a single sentence. Funny how we spend weeks trying to say the right things, and then love returns through something as simple as touch. When I finally turned around, she looked up at me with those tired, bright eyes and whispered, "I missed this." Not "I missed you." Not "I'm sorry." Just this, the space between us, the softness, the warmth. The everyday love we had forgotten how to hold. I whispered back, "Me too." 2 words. But they felt like a full chapter closing. Psychologists talk about repair moments, tiny interactions that signal emotional reconnection. They say these moments matter more than any argument, more than any apology. And standing there in that kitchen, wrapped in her arms while the pancakes burned a little more, I understood exactly what they meant, because that was the moment the bond returned. Not with fireworks, not with declarations, but with a quiet, steady truth. We were finding our way back to each other, gently, slowly, in the most human way possible, and that was enough. A new way to stay together. Some people think a relationship is saved by one big turning point. A single conversation, a dramatic revelation, a cinematic kiss in the rain. But the truth is quieter, slower, and far more human. In the days that followed, we didn't become perfect. We didn't suddenly communicate like saints or fall into flawless harmony. What we did was something much smaller and infinitely more sustainable. We chose a new way to stay together. It began with a pact. Not spoken, not formal, just understood. A promise to talk before tension builds, to listen before defending, to breathe before reacting. A promise to slow everything down. You see, when life speeds up, love gets blurry. And for 3 painful weeks, everything had been moving too fast for our hearts to keep up, so we created tiny rituals. Not romantic ones, not Instagram-worthy ones, just ordinary acts that anchored us. Every evening we sat at the dining table for 10 minutes. No devices. No distractions. Just 2 people asking simple questions that somehow carried enormous weight. How was your day? Did anything make you anxious? Is there something you need from me? They sound like small things, but they're not. They're doorways. They're bridges. They're the daily threads that keep love from unraveling. Slowly, something shifted. I began noticing the way she touched my arm when she wanted reassurance. The way her voice softened when she was tired. The way she leaned in just a little closer when I spoke gently. She began noticing things in me too. My pauses, my nervous habits, the way I sometimes look down when trying to find the right English word for a hard emotion. But instead of getting frustrated, she waited. That patience, quiet, steady, undramatic, became the safest place I'd ever known. And ironically, those slow conversations improved my English more than any class could, because they forced me to speak from the heart, not from a textbook. When emotions are real, language becomes real. When connection is real, communication becomes clear. It's not about perfect grammar. It's about brave honesty. One night, as we sat together with a candle flickering between us, she said, "I think we forgot that love grows in small days, not big moments." And she was right. Daily care shapes bonds. Not the vacations, not the anniversaries, not the Instagram memories, just the ordinary gentle work of choosing each other again and again. Looking back now, I realize something that feels both obvious and profound. We didn't survive those 3 weeks because we loved each other. We survived because we learned how to practice love. And practice love, the everyday kind, is the kind that lasts. So if you're listening to this sitting somewhere between hope and exhaustion, wondering if your relationship can find its way back, here's what I learned. You don't fix love all at once. You fix it in whispers, in pauses, in tiny acts of care. You fix it by staying slowly, deliberately, bravely. And that's how we kept going.